I'm going to move into the item 14, allocation of the Sport and Recreation Facilities Investment Fund. Councillor Watson, did you want to move this? Because I think you're one of the fittest ones out of all of us here. If not, yeah, Councillor Watson. Ask for a seconder. Councillor Cashmore, the second fittest. So it's been moved and seconded, so I'll just put on the table and invite both Nick and Dave. Tēnā korua. Thank you.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Chair, and tēnā koutou I ngā rangatira o te committee, ko Nick Harris taku ingoa, no te whānau te kaunihira Sport and Recreation. Firstly, very quickly, can I please just take a very quick moment to acknowledge yourselves at this last meeting of the term. You deserve our acknowledgement for your service to our city and its community, so I thank you all. I have also like to just thank and acknowledge the chairs from Upper Harbour and Franklin local boards for their deputations earlier on today, and thank them for their supportive comments regarding this fund and the process that has led us to this meeting today. I am very pleased to present this report to Allocate the Sport and Recreation Facilities Investment Fund for 2022-2023. I'll just make sure this is going. Here we are. The fund is a contestable fund which will invest up to $150 million over the long-term plan to support development of sport and recreation facilities in the Auckland region. The fund is a strategic tool to address network gaps and leverage external investment into sport and rec facilities, which will respond to the changing needs in the sport and rec sector. We have $15.368 million available in the current funding round. Here we are. A two-stage application process began in November 2021. We received 103 expressions of interest, which indicates the very high demand for investment of this nature. This was narrowed down to 38 stage 2 applications. These were processed and presented for engagement with local boards and with iwi mana whenua, and then taken to an independent assessment panel. The panel sat in July this year and produced recommendations which we workshopped with the PACE committee in August. The panel's recommendations are presented in attachment B to the agenda report. The table in there shows a high-level snapshot of each application, including the funding request, the panel's recommendation, and an option 2 for an adjusted allocation based on the panel's recommendation. The panel recommended 21 projects for funding. The adjusted recommendation bumps that number up to 24. The staff have proposed these adjustments to the allocation just in an attempt to squeeze a little bit more value out of the investment, to spread the investment a little bit further and achieve some low-cost achievable outcomes. On the slide in front of you, you can see the adjustments that have been made. These are only the impacted projects, not the remaining, not the unaffected applications. This information is in the table. It's option 2, the adjusted independent assessment panel recommendation, which is the recommendation which staff recommend to the committee. And looking at that, the spread of applications and investment can be seen on the slide here. In blue, the number of expressions of interest that we received, so we can see a really good spread across the region, which is a big improvement from the last funding round. And then also a good spread of actual funded projects, or recommended funded projects in grey. The recommendation in option 2 supports 24 grants across 14 local boards, and there's 16 sports codes involved. And just finally, 95% of the investment will go into construction phase projects, and with a potential leverage ratio of approximately 2 to 1. So thank you, Mr. Chair. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take questions about the report or the recommendation.
Tēnā koe, Nick. Dave, anything?
Kia ora, Mr. Chairman. No, thank you.
Ka pai. So I got the first pātai is from Councillor Newman, followed by Councillor Bartley.
Yeah, look, thank you very much. Good afternoon, Alf, and thank you to the officers. I'll be supporting the recommendations enthusiastically, but the question I have, having worked extensively with the clubs in my ward, the feedback that I get from a lot of clubs who don't go down the expressions of interest path is that it is such a huge amount of work with no guaranteed outcome. And obviously, I'm very concerned in relation to Manarewa that an area that is, there's a real issue of a deficit in equity funding, that those clubs are preferring not to go down this path because of the challenge that we face. We've talked before about the need to try and really look at the ways in which we can recalibrate this, but can you give me any sense as to what can be done to address this in the future? Because whilst I am more than comfortable, to the extent that I have a mandate to do so, to try and secure third-party funding and sponsorship, and I do, it really concerns me that we only had a very small number of EOIs from that local board and other local boards, and they didn't get passed. They didn't get recommended for funding. So what do we do about that?
Thank you, Councillor. Through the Chair. I think it's the great challenge with an investment tool of this nature. It is a contestable fund, and it is for applications that can involve significant amounts of money, and therefore there does need to be a degree of rigour involved in the process. Also, the projects can be quite complicated, and particularly for, I'm talking about in terms of facility development projects. They can be a challenging undertaking for community level organisations. So we are conscious of that, and yet it is our task to administer the contestable funding in a professional and robust, transparent manner. So in terms of what can be done to improve that, I suppose, speaking hypothetically, there's reconsidering the way that the fund might work. That's not something that we can do at an operational level. And in terms of the contestability or non-contestability of the fund, that's a governance level consideration. There is a possibility to attack it from the other end, from the application end, and trying to support communities with community organisations with their applications. I would have to point out that sort of work is actually ongoing. It does occur successfully or otherwise, and and yet obviously there's a need for some more. And that's that is a potential work on that has been identified through our internal debriefs, and it's probably sits out. I'm inclined to see it, if I may, as a challenge that sits outside the administration of the fund as a capability build piece of work. Thank you.
Yeah, look, thank you, Chair. I'm gonna speak to this matter later on. It's not a comment about the officer's work here. It's just a comment about the process that I think needs to change in the future. But thank you very much, and reserve my right to speak.
Kapa, I got you down on the list. Councillor Bartley.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the officers, Nick and Dave. My question is no surprise. I wanted to ask regarding whether or how confident the officers are that the recommendations meet our policy objectives for this fund, in particular in terms of communities of greatest need and in terms of projects that will have a significant impact on insufficiently active communities with low participation in sport and recreation. And I ask this in terms of two particular grants in the millions going to an area with an average household income of 90,000 compared to, for instance, the Waikaraka Park application for Onehunga with a household income of 40 grand. So that's my question. Thank you.
Through the chair, thank you, Councillor. In terms of our confidence in the fund achieving its policy objectives, I think we have all the confidence we can have, given our reliance on the contestable funding process that we have administered. So the recommendations that we have before you now, notwithstanding the minor adjustments that are proposed, are the product of a process which is some 10 months long. The recommendations come from an independent assessment panel, and we have to have some faith in the panel's ability as a collective to produce recommendations that are consistent with the guidelines for the fund that they've been provided. If we can't do that, then it creates a problem for the transparency of the process. In terms of the proposed allocation to the projects that you mention, in a contestable funding process, the applications, so every applicant has an opportunity to submit thorough and clear information to be assessed, and it was considered through the processing of applications and consideration by the panel that some applications had presented clearer information and made a stronger case for their project proposal than others, and that is weighted into the recommendations, and it is my understanding that is the dynamic that has been at play with respect to Waikaraka Park, and why that project was not recommended to proceed in this funding round. I would add that that's not necessarily the end of the line for Waikaraka Park or any unsuccessful applicant, because the next funding round will be starting in 4 to 6 weeks. And there will be an opportunity for unsuccessful applicants and new applicants to approach us to be considered for funding in the future.
Yeah, Kapai.
Oh, Carol, thank you. That's good to hear that they have that it isn't the end of the road.
Yeah, kapai.
If I could ask one more question, please, Chair.
Kapai.
Thank you. In terms of like this fund goes to areas where there's already facilities, and so one could argue that they're at an advantage to areas that don't have as many facilities. Is there any advice as to how we can address that kind of inequity? Or is that for the chair? I'm not sure. Or is that something going forward post-election?
Kia ora, thanks for the question, and through you, Mr. Chairman. So, as part of our analysis around the applications that we receive, we consider, network level provision and looking at where we have shortfalls as part of the network, and that includes, a number of ways of looking at equity. So it includes looking at equity across codes. It obviously looks at areas of deprivation as well. As Nick referenced in his earlier answer, there is an opportunity for us to think a little bit differently in the future around this fund, to have a more proactive approach where we identify areas of shortfall of our facilities to make sure that we're, going to the sector and asking for them to respond back to us on projects or areas that we feel like there are shortfalls of facilities, so taking much more of a proactive approach to the use of this fund. That's not where we are at the moment in terms of the contestable process, but it's something that we'd like to discuss with the future iteration of this committee in the future. Kia ora.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you,
Kapai.
David, Nick.
Yeah. And Nick, I just want to acknowledge the fact that you ended up following up with an email from Councillor Bartley and then meeting her. So just want to acknowledge that. Matua Wilcox, aroha mai.
Thank you, Chair. You engaged with mana whenua prior to the kaupapa beginning, and you had some questions and queries about how you could improve the way it went forward. Did you take that into account when you were doing this funding round, or is that going to happen in the next funding round? That's my first question.
Through the chair, tēnā koe matua, and thank you for your question. Yes, so our engagement with mana whenua prior to this funding round did help us shape up the guidelines that we and the questions in the application forms that we used. So there was a small evolution as a result of that the discussions that we had there, and it was expressed in that kōrero that it would be what we intended to be the first of many. We do hope to be able to improve this investment tool each time we do it. So what happens next is we send the funding round out into the wild, and we see what applications will come back to us. And this is an echo of the previous question. I think what we've seen is that there were really no Māori-led applications, not really even sort of Māori-focused applications. The general thrust of the responses to Māori outcomes questions was highlighting the generic benefit of sport and recreation to Māori as members of Auckland communities, rather than specific Māori outcomes. So we are looking at this and looking at how to improve it. The advice that we have thus far is to focus on on developing the applications at the community level. So it's that same community build capability build challenge that that was picked up by Councillor Newman's question. We do hope that when an application like that does come through, that actually the the way the questions and the funding criteria and the assessment process will actually, I suppose, prove its worth and see those applications through, bearing in mind obviously that they still need to meet the other achievability kind of criteria that every application would. So it is, it's the similar challenge. It's the similar the tension between contestability and maintaining an independent, robust, transparent, fair, and consistent process versus the sort of the equity approach and the strong drivers that we have for that in council, of being able to reach out to provide extra help where it's needed. There's a tension between those two that we need to walk as staff, and we're in the process of learning to improve as we go.
To that, Chair. Yes, so Ngāti Chata and I know Kaipara did as well for Orewa Surf Lifesaving Club. Both made submissions specifically for those two kaupapa, for different kaupapa. So how are we going to respond to those two groups that did, Māori groups that did? Because the kōrero always is, if Māori have a kōrero, we've got to take it back and tell them why. So what's the process now?
Through the chair, yes. So when we know the outcome of today's meeting and the resolutions, we know the funding outcome, then there will be a step that involves reporting back to the to iwi mana whenua through the forums. And also all of the applicants, successful and unsuccessful, who have been identified by mana whenua for further engagement, will be asked or have it made clear to them that that request has been made, and that it will then be on those organisations to seek out that kōrero in their time.
Sorry, I'm a bit confused here. Sorry, Chair. So you are you saying that the organisations go back to those iwi or those hapu, or do council inform the hapu directly through our relationship under
Through the chair, I apologise if I wasn't clear. It will be both. So council will inform mana whenua as to the outcome of the funding decision from the committee today. Council will also inform the applicants, successful and unsuccessful, that they have been asked to engage with their local iwi mana whenua.
Okay. Just one final question, Chair. What iwi is merrily?
What iwi is merrily?
There's a whakapapa question here.
Aroha mai, I do not know.
Matua kake, and I think you're the last of our pātai, and then we'll move into whakaaro.
I think my question's pretty much resolved now through the chair. It was just how effective is the traffic light system in achieving Māori outcomes, but I think the conversation has been really clear. The staff are going to be, well, it sounds like they're gonna do something. They have intent to do something. I'd like to be around, hopefully, to hear the change in the kōrero. So sorry, it's changed from an intended question to a comment, but I think the previous speakers have covered that now, around really achieving Māori outcomes and equity. We need to change up the system. Or I'll put it in a question there. Do you have confidence in the system, the way that we apply this funding to ensure that we get better equity in the distribution of the funds and going forward?
Through the chair, kia ora matua. So thank you for your question. So again, we're banging up against the tension between contestable funding, which requires almost a hands-off administration approach. It needs to remain consistent, transparent, robust, and the desired equity outcomes. As I have said, there is a tension between those two approaches. As staff, we don't feel able to change, at least in terms of inside the administration of the fund as a piece of work, to be able to provide the additional help to some applicants over others that is required in parts of the region where the capability levels amongst the community organisations is lower. We saw clearly in the last funding round that the applications came almost universally from parts of the region where the capability of community organisations was higher, and unfortunately, because it's a contestable fund, those were the applications that we had to consider, and that was why the funding went to those areas. This time round, we've actually been pleased with an increase in the spread of expressions of interest and in stage 2 applications. So we think that we're trending in the right direction, but I would comment that we will continually bump up against this challenge, the tension between the desired equity outcomes and the contestable funding, the rigours of contestable funding that are necessary of us to impose. Kia ora.
That's a good question through the chair.
Matua, just Dave wants to respond to your first partai, and then I'll wait for you for your second.
Kia ora, thanks for the question, Matua. So just to add to Nick's response, so succinctly, I've got confidence in the process at the moment that it achieves to the best of our ability equity outcomes across Auckland. That doesn't mean that there aren't improvements that we can make, and I've spoken earlier about how in the future we may be able to look at some proactive approaches to really target areas of our community. Additionally, through other parts of our investment into the sport and recreation sector, we do look to support sort of sector capability. So at the last business meeting for this committee, we put some investment into the Regional Sports Trusts network around the development of sector capability. A strong component of that is around supporting Maori sports organisations in the development of their capability as well. So there's other ways that our investment portfolio works into the sports sector that hopefully addresses some of the equity concerns that we have through a program of investment like this, and further ensures equity of outcome across our various communities. Kia ora.
Second partai, Matua.
Yeah, no, thank you for that last comment. I think, contestability, you can always be contestable if, if one team's got 100 players and the other team have only got 2, you're still going to be you're still going to be competing, but it's just not an equal race. So I think you've got the message, kapai.
Kia ora. There's no further partai from either in the room or online. So, Dave, congratulations on your role as the acting GM for active community sport, rec, pools and leisure. So just wanted to acknowledge that. Thank you, Nick, for the work you've done, and also pass it on to your team. So tēnā korua. Well, I'm just going to open up. I know that Councillor Newman has some whakaaro, some comments to make. So I'll go to Councillor Newman.
Thank you, Chair. Look, firstly, I want to acknowledge the officers. I want to acknowledge the panel for the assessment work, and I note the moderation because the what has been recommended is at variance, slightly at variance, and significantly at variance in relation to a number of these recipients. But I do think that my view is that there is going to have to be more brokerage support for some of these organisations, which goes beyond information, discussions, workshopping, that sort of thing. Some of these groups that need to be recipients are going to need more help than just information and encouragement, because it is a very, very significant amount of work that's required, rightly so, for public money. You're talking many millions of dollars. But nevertheless, whilst I want to see contestability, and whilst I want to see meritorious applications, it's difficult to overlook some of the concerns that have been raised by some about where the funding goes and where it does not go. In this term, I've had several successful applications in my ward in Papakura. I don't think I've had a single application succeed in Manarewa. There are reasons for that, but I think that whilst this is a better funding allocation than in previous years, I think there is nevertheless a need for some policy reflection back on the equity arguments that have continued to plague this council. And of course, equity is fundamental to the Auckland plan that we talk about. So I will definitely be supporting this. The one other thing that I would say, Chair, is that in relation to some of these applications, the moment that you start to spend on these projects, particularly for a refurbishment of an existing facility that's tired, of course the cost starts to escalate quickly. I accept that in relation to Papakura City FC. Ultimately, that is going to be, we're probably going to end up having to fundraise several $1 million for that facility over the next few years, which is a worthy challenge. If I'm back next term, that's something I want to be doing. So just to acknowledge that yes, this funding is very important, but of course it's only one part of a much bigger piece of work for some of these applicants, and they will need to significantly leverage beyond what the funding amounts are that they receive today. Thank you.
Kia ora. Councillor Bartley.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I did want to acknowledge the officers for responding to my email, for really taking on board my concerns around making sure that this fund is used to address real need, and how we reach out to those organisations that aren't further along the spectrum in terms of capacity and being able to have these facilities that could qualify for this. So I really do appreciate their time and effort. I am going to speak. I am going to support this, but I would like us in the future to look at the equity arguments that both the equity issues that we've spoken of earlier today. I want to speak about Waikaraka Park and acknowledge the leadership of Wade and Frank and the Auckland Stock and Saloon Car Club. They haven't had a good run with council, but I know this fund isn't about readdressing the issues that we've done to that club with the grandstand and things like that. But I really applaud their leadership in trying to support the master planning for the whole park, for a community hub, a multi-sport facility there, which they are part of. And although I'm disappointed that they weren't successful here, I understand that it is about a pipeline of projects and that other projects were further along that pipeline than this application. But I do take heart that they are in the pipeline, perhaps early stages, but I hope they can be supported to make this come through, hopefully, if not the next round, well, hopefully the next round. But yeah, the community hub, we definitely need that over in the Onehunga side, as I mentioned, in terms of average household income over there being quite low and the need for a multi-sport given all the intensification we have going up in Onehunga. I want to support One Tree Hill College. One Tree Hill, I went out to the school to check what the cover is for that they were asking for, and man, I was blown away by the diversity of the students in the school and the diversity of the community use that happens at the school. Again, 16,000 expected to move into the area, but no actual provision for green space or recreation around that particular area for those families that are moving in there. So the school is really doing us a favour by opening up to the community like this. So I support their application. And also Ellerslie Football, noting that, yes, they're doing this for FIFA, very exciting for our community, but noting that Wakaraka Park could have been successful with FIFA if we had, gotten behind and supported that park with all the issues that are going on there, and even the fact that we have a successful football club there, we still can't seem to get that park up to a good standard. So those are my comments, but I will be supporting this. Thank you, Chair.
Kia ora, Councillor Cooper.
Mr. Chair, I want to thank the staff and the panel. This is not easy. We'll never have enough money to do all the projects. It would be wonderful if we did. So I just wanted to say, I wanted to acknowledge all the people that had applied, because it does take a lot. It's usually volunteers that are doing this, and you've got to really acknowledge our volunteer community. They often aren't highly skilled in this. They don't do it for a job. They just work through the process. And I've worked alongside Writing for the Disabled, and this project came to my attention over 20 years ago. And this community, very small, basically 2 women on the committee, have just worked so hard. They've raised other funds, etc. One of the reasons I support that particular project is that there's a Writing for the Disabled in the south and one on the North Shore, but there's none in the west, and they've kept going, providing the service with a really subpar outdoor environment, which means in the winter often they can't do it, and they have to let down a lot of people with disabilities. And also out west we have some of the highest number of people with disabilities because it's cheaper to live there. So those people go there because they often don't have full-time jobs or high-paid jobs. So, and then the cost to get to the North Shore or to South Auckland is really makes it impossible for them. So I'm really happy to see that this facility will be built. It will also be used by Pony Club and other members of the community for other activities. And, to see this finally be able to be realised after over 20 years is really extraordinary. So I just want to thank all members of the staff that have worked on this. I was listening online when I was driving back from Paranui. And so thank you for that. And I hope that all councillors would support this as we all support one another's projects across the region. Thank you.
Kia ora. I'm just going to say something, and then if the mover, Councillor Wants to close the debate, I'll let him do that. So look, I just trust the process, but I think what Dave and Nick were saying, which is important for us, is that if we need any policy change around communities addressing equity, that's a discussion and a decision that will have to be made in the next political term. But I trust the process, especially with the panel, and ensuring that they have an independent overview of all the applications and all the information. So that's it from me. I don't know if there's any further speakers. John, if you will close the debate. Kia ora.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to pick up on your comments about trusting the process, particularly at an election time. There's often in debates, or at least we're finding it in our wards, where there are people suggesting that if they get in or they ally with someone else, they'll get projects delivered to them, they'll get grants to deliver to them. But as much as I'm one of those councillors who are not slow in coming forward to criticise the council when I think I deserve it, certainly in terms of processes, when it goes to the allocation of projects, when it goes to Auckland Transport, when it goes to any of these facilities, there is an objectivity there that deserves recognition. People don't quite understand what thorough processes that projects have to go through to get approval, and that's not really open to influence, political or otherwise. So I would acknowledge and credit the people throughout the organisation who display that neutrality, because that's the way it should be, and certainly a number of candidates out there might do well to acknowledge that, because that's how all of Auckland is served. Thank you.
Kia ora. So look, the debate's been closed, and I'm going to put the recommendation. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried.
Aye.
I'm just going to move a recommendation extension of time. So I will move that. Deputy Mayor, if you second that one. So I'll put the recommendation extension of time. All those in favour? Aye. Against?
Aye.
Carried.